This presentation is from the Church of Jesus Christ, Zion's Branch, located in Independence, Missouri. The sermon message is brought by Elder Clay Barber and is titled, Faith as a Grain of Mustard Seed.
This morning as I was reading about faith. I was still thinking about what it is I should bring this morning. And what popped into my head was a scripture where Jesus said, if you have faith as a mustard seed. And I think I'd like to go along that line. That verse that I was thinking of came from the 17th chapter of Matthew. Start off at about verse 15. Maybe I should set the stage a little bit. Jesus and Peter, James, and John have been up on the mountain, and Jesus was transfigured before them. Remember that happening where Jesus appears with Moses and John the Baptist, and they're all there, and Peter then decides to say something like, hey, let's make a tabernacle for each of you three, and God comes up and the voice from the cloud says, this is my beloved Son, hear him. And the message is pretty plain that way, that Moses was great, John the Baptist was great in the things that they did for God, but God sent his Son to be with us, and we're supposed to listen to his instructions. And so going back to that, the kids were listening to Esther's voice rather than the instructions of the voice. You know, it's along that line that we sometimes get distracted from things, and we don't really pay attention to what the message is, and instead we're paying attention to the other things that have our attention. Well, they come down from the mountain, and there's a multitude at the bottom of the mountain apparently, and it says, when they were come to the multitude, there came to Jesus, a man kneeling down to him and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is lunatic and sore vexed. And for oft times he falleth into the fire and oft into the water. And it brought him to the disciples, and they could not cure him. So that was problematic, that the fellow had trusted the disciples of Jesus Christ to cure his son, and he wasn't satisfied that the disciples were unable to do that. He came back and he went directly to Jesus himself, knowing that there was the possibility that his son would be healed. And Jesus answered and said, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him hither to me. And Jesus rebuked the devil, and he departed out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. So Jesus, was visibly upset with the disciples and their lack of ability to trust God enough to heal this young man and to drive the devil out of him. Then came the disciples to Jesus apart. So they're off to the side now. They're away from the multitude, and the disciples want to ask Jesus something face to face. I don't want to ask you in front of this big crowd type thing. Ever felt that way? You don't really want to ask, I can remember the teachers always wanting you to give the answers to questions in class and that type of thing. And I never raised my hand. I knew the answer, a good percentage of the time, but I would never raise my hand because there was the doubt, the possibility, the fear that I could be wrong. And then I would be embarrassed in front of all these classmates and things like that. So the disciples have talked to Jesus, they're talking to him off on the side. And, I can understand that. I've been there, I've done that. It says, then came the disciples to Jesus apart and said, why could not we cast him out? Why could we not cast this devil out? And Jesus said unto them, because of your unbelief. For verily I say unto you, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you shall say unto this mountain, remove to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. Howbeit, or however, this kind goeth not out but by prayer and fasting. So this this particular instance, Jesus his first response is, because of your unbelief. You could not do this because of your unbelief. We cannot prepare a place for Jesus to return to if we have insufficient belief, if we have unbelief, if we're not willing to go with what these scriptures say and listen to the instructions that are in them and move the things away from ourselves or out of ourselves and do things in accordance with the commandments of God and Jesus Christ, we can't do those things either if we have unbelief. It's a problem, an issue, something that we need to overcome. And then he goes on and he talks about how just having faith of a grain of mustard seed would be sufficient to move an entire mountain. And what that does is it puts in perspective how little faith is necessary to do great and wonderful and marvelous things. It's not saying that just because you have the faith that it's necessary to move that mountain. But what it is saying is that in the cases where there are things that need to be changed in our lives, things that need to be brought together amongst ourselves, things that need to happen to promote this gospel and to promote the message of Jesus Christ and to promote Zion itself, you don't need a huge amount of faith. You need enough faith that you believe in the tasks, in the message, and have the desire that overcomes the things in your life that prevent you from giving yourself over to the message of the gospel. Jesus goes on and he talks about nothing is impossible for you when you have that kind of faith. And then he gives them a little more instruction about, nevertheless, this kind doesn't go out all that easy. You need to do diligence. You need to prepare yourself. And he says this kind doesn't go out but by prayer and fasting. What it's telling us in that case is that in order to have this faith, just having faith alone is not enough. There needs to be preparation. There needs to be effort applied. The word that Roger always liked, diligence. Yep, it was diligence. Painstaking effort, right? He used to remind us of that when he was here. That when we were diligent, there was a painstaking effort applied to things. Why don't we flip over to Hebrews 11, because that's where I was when I started thinking about faith this morning. This is the classic chapter about faith, right? Paul goes through all of these wonderful examples of people that have faith. But he starts out the chapter with a simple verse that says that faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. If you don't have faith that, let's go back to those disciples and the things they were unable to do to cast out the devil. They had to have a belief. They had to have an understanding that God would be with them to cast that devil out. And there was a lack of trust on their part, just like the lack of trust that I had when I wouldn't raise my hand even though I knew the answer. There's things that we need to do in our lives to push ourselves, to push beyond the boundaries that we place in front of ourselves that prevent us from having this faith that is the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Paul goes on, and I'm going to skip a few verses. Chapter 11, verse 6 of Hebrews, he says, "But without faith it is impossible to please him," please God. "For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him." There's all kinds of people in this world that have a faith that there is a heaven, right? You don't even have to be of Christianity to believe that there is a heaven or some special place after this life. Any of you seen heaven? Well, maybe we did once, before we came down here, but we don't really remember it. And so having that heaven as something that we look for and we trust that there is this evidence of things not seen, this faith, this belief that exists. But in verse 6 it says, without faith it is impossible to please God. So there's more to faith than just believing in these things that you haven't seen. Right? There's more to it. There has to be more to it. It's impossible to please God if you don't have faith. Well, God, I believe that there's this heaven. Isn't that enough? Basically, this says no. It's not enough to just believe there is a heaven. Now I'm thinking of a different verse in James. Faith without works is dead, right? What kind of works are we talking about here? In the time of Paul and those guys, there was a big feud over Christianity and the Jews and the works of the Jews and their law and that type of thing like that. But when James talks about faith without works is dead, he's not talking about works of the Moses' law. He's talking about works that show that we believe. Things that we do that would push ourselves to change. Things that we would do to show forth this belief in God and Jesus Christ and to be that grain of mustard seed, have that grain of mustard seed within ourselves, that something special can happen. We don't have a physical mountain that we need to move necessarily. But we have mountains in our minds, in our hearts, in our spirits that are there to prevent us from doing things. We need to move those mountains. And what Jesus is saying is it doesn't take a lot of faith to get those mountains moved. It takes faith, the grain of a mustard seed, which is, quite small. You probably can't even see the gap between my two fingers from back where you are. They look like they're pressed together, but they're not. There's a little teeny gap there, and that's as much faith as a mustard seed is. Not very big. What Jesus is saying is, put that effort in. Believe that faith. Believe, and that faith can make wonderful, marvelous things happen. In the case of the disciples, it could have made that devil or what the bad spirit that was in the young man to be taken away like Jesus did. But it took some effort, is what he told them. It took prayer and fasting for that particular devil to be taken out. It's not that we can just have faith and faith is good enough. Faith by itself is only the beginning of things. It's a place for us to start. And if we have faith that is sufficient, marvelous things can happen. This is a tiny group of people compared to congregations of the world. We're not sitting in a mega auditorium that seats 25,000 people. We're not sitting where we have to have 25,000 people roll in for the 8 o'clock service and another 25,000 people roll in for the 10 o'clock service and that type of thing. That isn't happening with us. But wonderful, marvelous things can happen with us, provided we have faith in God, provided we put forth the effort to make those things happen. We believe that Jesus Christ will return We believe that there needs to be a place prepared for him to return. We believe that Zion are those people of one heart and one mind that dwell together in righteousness. We're not there yet, are we? It hasn't happened, has it? But what this is saying is it's possible. We can't make it happen by ourselves, that's for sure. What we can make happen is if we believe, and we believe according to the Scriptures, and a wonderful thing will happen. I was reading this morning in Romans, the end of chapter 3 and the parts of chapter 4. And again, this is about faith. This is about the kind of faith Abraham had. And we know that wonderful things happened because of Abraham's faith. Because of Abraham's faith, we got the covenant that God made with the house of Israel. That in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, and that in the fulfillment of that covenant came Jesus Christ to this earth, which allows us to have then the opportunity to come back into the presence of God, to believe in that heaven, to have something concrete associated with it. So, in verse 27 of chapter 3 of Romans, which I have on page 1090, Paul's asking, where is the boasting then? It is excluded by what? Law of works? Nay, but by the law of faith. The law of works being, Paul's talking about the law of Moses in this case. Is it excluded by the law of works? No, it's excluded by the law of faith. Therefore we conclude that a man is justified by faith alone, without the deeds of the law. If you will recall, when did Abraham receive the covenant from God? You know, he gave him this token of his covenant by having him circumcised and then circumcised all the young men and that type of thing. What this is saying is that was a work. That was something that God gave as an example of something that would happen. But the covenant itself was given long before that happened. And it happened because Abraham had faith. Chapter 3, verse 31. Do we then make void the law through faith? God forbid, yea, we establish the law. Chapter 4, verse 1, it says, what shall we say then? That Abraham our father as pertaining to the flesh hath found. For if Abraham were justified by the law of works, he hath to glory in himself, but not of God. That law of works happened 400 years after Abraham was dead. Remember? They had gone into Egypt and been there for a long period of time, and Moses was about to take them out. And it was only after they were actually exited Egypt that that law came about at all, wasn't it? That law of Moses wasn't even in existence at the time Abraham was alive. So he says that law of works, that law of Moses, has nothing to do with faith. For what saith the Scripture? Abraham believed God, and it was counted unto him for righteousness. For us, that's the way that we need to approach faith. We need to believe God, and it'll be counted to us for righteousness. But we need to put forth effort in order to show that we believe, in order to have that faith, in order to have that blessing that comes from that faith. We need to do something about it. Going back to the grain of mustard seed again, Jesus says that if you have faith of that magnitude, that big, wonderful, marvelous things can happen. We can have that kind of faith. We've had to have that kind of faith throughout the years here. But as I think Alma talks in his discussions with his son, He reminds us that that faith, that putting that faith into ourselves and starting to believe it and allowing it to grow is only the beginning. That faith must get bigger, it must get larger, it must be more robust, it must have deeper roots, it must have stronger branches in order to be able to accomplish the bigger things that we have to accomplish. It's hard enough to keep ourselves corralled and going in the right path. But to keep ourselves along with this group of people that we have, all corralled and going in the same direction and going along a straight and narrow path, it takes effort on each and every one of our parts to have that belief, to have that grain of mustard inside of us to be able to do those wonderful things collectively that God has given us to do. Enoch didn't make Zion by himself. He had others that were with him. We don't know how many others. It doesn't say. But what it does say is that together, it was a wonderful thing. And together, they were taken up into heaven because God looked upon their righteousness and said, I can't leave you on the earth any longer. It's getting too nasty. Let's go. Now we've got the opposite situation where all the nastiness is around us again, and it's time for us to prepare a place for Zion to return. That Jesus Christ would be there as well. And that New Jerusalem would be based on their love, their understanding, their power, and the things of the world would be pushed away. It talks about the sides of the walls being 1,500 furlongs apiece, and it being 1,500 furlongs high. A furlong's an eighth of a mile. But you can divide 1,500 by 8, and you can come up with what the size and length and width and height of the walls were supposed to be. The symbolic walls that John's talking about there. Those walls are meant to say that even if there is this tiny group of people, 1,500 furlongs is a long way. You know, if it starts here or starts somewhere, it covers a big stretch of the U.S. territory, well larger than independence itself. And what it's saying is there's a big buffer zone. There's a big area of protection around his people. Can you imagine 1,500 furlongs high? We can't build buildings that tall. That's something that is also meant to be symbolic in that nothing's going to get in. I don't know if you remember that song when you were a kid, the sing at campfire, you must go in at the door. Rock of my soul in the bosom of Abraham. You can't get around the walls. You can't get over the walls. You can't dig under the walls, is what the song says, but you must go in at the door. Jesus talked about if you try to get in any other way, you're a thief and a robber. You must go in at the door. You must go in the 12 gates that's around that New Jerusalem. You must go in a way that is consistent with a faith and a belief in the message of Jesus Christ. And you must go in with enough faith that you can do something wonderful in this world. Not by yourself, but through the power of God and the power of the Holy Spirit and the power of Jesus Christ, the power of the gospel. That's how we do something wonderful. Faith. Simple concept, right? Well, it is a simple concept. It needs to be simple concept. As Paul wrote in Hebrews, the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That in itself is what we hope for, right? We hope for that there really is a basis for this heaven. We hope for a return of Jesus Christ. But without something inside of us saying how important that faith is and making a change in our lives, then faith isn't good for anything. It's not going to make anything happen just by believing there's a heaven. We need to do something about it with our own lives. We need to put into practice the things that we believe, and then that faith actually means something. And then there's actually things that can happen because of that faith. I do thank you for your time and for your attention, and appreciate the opportunity to speak to you.
I want to thank Clay for his message this morning. Faith. It's impossible to please God, and that's one thing that we, by being here and by exercising our obedience in the waters of baptism, we want to please God. But in order to please Him, we have to have faith, and we have to believe that He is, and that He's a rewarder of those that diligently, painstaking effort, that those that diligently seek Him. It's going to take effort. It's not, I have faith, I believe, and now I'm going to go do whatever I want to do. No, that painstaking effort means that you dig in and endure the things that you have to endure, but you're going to stand for the things that are right, the things that are just, the things that are true. Pray that you would have a good week this week, and that you would go out and exercise. You're wondering what's coming next. Exercise your faith. And put it to work. Put it alive within your life. And stand up and represent He whom you made a covenant with.
Thank you for letting us share this message with you, a message dedicated to the truth found in the gospel of Jesus Christ. We have other messages available on YouTube and at our website. Check back with us often as we add more messages. Remember, truth is essential to your salvation. There is a way that seemeth right unto man, but the end thereof is death. Seek the truth. Be sure to understand why you believe what you believe. Thank you.